Hi there. My name is Hartaj Singh. I'm a biotechnology analyst at Oppenheimer and Company, and a managing director there also. I'll be speaking today on the use of computing software and hardware in drug development. Drug development is both preclinical and clinical. Preclinical is before it gets into human beings, and clinical is usually in human beings. Now, the dream of using computing, both software and hardware in drug development, has been around for a couple of decades. It is usually referred to as in silico development, meaning in a computer, versus in vitro or in vivo, which are approaches utilized today. And this approach has provided some really wonderful tools over the last couple of years. A good example is AlphaFold, a piece of software by DeepMind, a company owned by Alphabet, which also owns Google, publishing its predictions on 35,000 proteins recently, a couple of months ago, and providing it freely to people on the internet. The problem with in silico drug development has been really in the complexity of preclinical and later on in clinical development. What I mean by that is, in order to develop a drug, you have to first understand the pathology of the disease. So you've got to understand what the disease is, what's the underlying cause of the disease, and then also what's the dysregulation that's been caused, in that disease, and then come up with a drug that targets either one or both or many facets, components of this. That itself actually is not that easy. So that is an ongoing problem that the scientific and the academic communities all over the world are constantly working on. When it comes to using computers, it provides a great tool. For example, with DeepMind providing these predictions of various proteins, but you still have a lot of other complexity, what I call a multimodal approach, where you need to understand, that disease pathology, understand the dysregulation, and then understand what's wrong with, for example, a protein, and then how can you rectify the protein or eliminate the protein that is causing a disease, and then go into human beings and do that all over again from animals or in a petri dish, and then going into human beings. And that's really where a lot of the recent sort of issues with using software have come up. It's a great theory, and the potential is there, but we still need a lot of work. The other thing that investors routinely look for is they want validated solutions and tools applied to drug development, both in the preclinical and clinical process. Validated is extremely important. Validated means, to us, really solutions that have been utilized over and over again, have been validated, preferably by regulatory authorities or in the clinical or preclinical domain. And investors, especially public investors, don't want to sort of, I would say, fund basic science, while it's being done. They would rather it be done in universities or in the private setting and then brought into the public domain. And the second thing that public investors look for is what's called scalability. You have a solution that's scalable, not just one disease. You don't want to be a one-hit wonder. You can actually bring this solution and bring it to bear on many diseases other than just one. And this is where, for example, we cover a company called Gain Therapeutics, where we've gotten really excited recently. This is a publicly quoted company, just did an IPO, fairly small. They use computing power and models of proteins to tackle the underlying disease pathology. So for example, one of the first areas they're tackling is diseases where the protein is misfolded. And what they're trying to do is understand the protein, understand how it misfolds, and then identify parts of the protein where they can attach a molecule and help the protein be correctly folded, what's called allosteric binding. So binding at a site away from the catalytic site. And this is an area that's been sort of hot in biology for the last couple of decades, but really hasn't achieved any success in the clinical area. What Gain also has is what I call cross-functional teams that are bringing all of this together. So they have teams that understand the disease pathology, the dysregulation, folks who worked in industry in these areas. They have folks with really phenomenal computing backgrounds, both software and hardware, that understand the different tools in computing that can be utilized in helping come up with drugs to tackle some of these diseases. And what they're doing is a multimodal approach through this cross-functional team. And ultimately, they're also scalable. So this is a company that actually is already working on 1, 2, 3, 4 different diseases where if their initial approaches can show success preclinically, they can rapidly scale it into other diseases. The regulators, of course, gaining more and more comfort with their approach, will let them speed ahead more quickly in the preclinical process. We've seen that with a company called Moderna, which is doing that with their mRNA vaccines. And regulators are more comfortable with that modality called mRNA now and moving that forward. So again, I really believe this decade we're going to see some pretty tremendous gains in using computing software and hardware power to actually move drug development along both in the preclinical and in the clinical domain. Computing by itself is not going to solve any great problems in diseases, but combined with experienced human beings and cross-functional teams, I really do believe that's going to be a golden decade on the computing side in clinical drug development. Thank you.